Hello everyone, today I'm going to do the question 19 of my web development practical video series. Without further ado, let's go to our question list. Here you can see under day 3 we discussed the question 17, question 18, also the fourth question of the third day, and here's the fifth one, and it's the 19th question. As usual, I'm going to read the question first, and after that we can test my web page and then review the code. Okay, here's the question. A biology tuition teacher has decided to present a web application to the students who learn online during this pandemic season to see their examination result. Imagine that you are a freelance software engineer and the teacher has seen your work on your YouTube channel. He decided to hand over the work to you. Read the requirements carefully and make the application the teacher needs. Okay. Here are the requirements we have to cover when we are creating this web page. Create registration page, login page, view result page, and add result page. Okay, there should be 4 pages. Registration page should contain the student's name, email address, and password. Login credentials should be email and password. The teacher has a fixed email and password to login as email as admin@gmail.com and the password as admin@123. If the teacher logs in to the system, he should be redirected to the add result page. In the add result page, the teacher should be able to add students' results as student's name, examination date, result release date, marks, and grade. When a student logs into the system, the student should be redirected to the view result page. In the view result page, there should be the results viewed in a table of the students who logged in. Okay, that's the requirements we have to cover when we are creating this web page. Now I'm going to show you the web page I created as the answer. After that, we can discuss the codes I used to create that web page. Okay, here we are in the answer. This is the page I created. You can see here's the heading, and after that here's the registration area. I designed both registration and login pages in the same web page, and here's the registration. You can see I covered the requirements when a new student registering. He should insert his first name, email, and then password. After that, here's the login page. It only requires email and password. Okay, that's are the 2 requirements. Here we cover these 2 parts, registration and login. And now I'm going to check the validation part in my web application. So in order to do that, I'm going to click on the add user button without entering any data to the registration form. Okay, here I click on the add user button. Here's an error message. You need to fill both fields. Error. And again in the login page, login part here, when I click on the login button without entering any data, the same error message pop up. You need to fill both fields. Okay, let's fill 1 or 2 fields and then left some fields behind, and let's click on the button. So you can see this form is not this form is incomplete. Let's see what will be the reaction after I click on the add user button. Okay, you can see the same error message pop up every time I click on the add or login button. in registration part or the login part when the data is not correct. Okay, now I'm going to register as a new user or new student. In the question they said you have to create a fixed email and password to the teacher. It should be admin@gmail.com and admin@123. Okay, I'm going to check that email and password and see whether I can access the ad result page when I use this admin email and password. Okay, let's see. admin@gmail.com and here admin@123. Okay, here is the password and here's the email. Let's click on the login button. You can see here the alert came up, login complete, redirecting to the home page. Okay, let's click on the OK button. Here you can see we are in the ad result page. Now here is a selector wheel and we can see the students already registered in our system. Here there are two students, Venura and Kamalani, and after that here's the examination date. We can add the examination date and also the result release date. You can see these input fields only accept the data in date format, and here is the input field. We can enter the marks of the student and also the grade of the student, and after that we can submit the detail. Now I'm going to show you my database, and let's enter new results to a student, and after that let's log in as that student and see whether those details are showing or not. Here is the database. We are in the HDSQL browser. You know, if you watch my previous videos, what is HDSQL browser. We use this software to graphically view the data in our MySQL service. Okay, here this is the database I created. Don't find the name, but here are two tables. These tables have relationships with each other. Here is the student and also here is the exam, and you can see the student ID. Here is the student table. This table will record the details of the students, which are name, email and password. You can see you saw the registration page. When a new student login, he should enter his name, email and password. So those details will be stored in this database. These are the two students who already registered in this system, and here is the exam table. In this exam table you can see this table I used to record the marks of the student. When we add results to students, those details will be stored in this table, and you can see I foreign the student ID. Here the student ID is foreign from the student table to this exam table, and we can use this to identify the results of specific students. Okay, now these are the two results I already registered. Now we can add new result. Okay, let's go back to the add result page, and you can see these two students are showing in our student name selected. Okay, before that let's register a new user. Let's go back to the, let me clear one. let me clear this one, and after that let's register a new user first. Okay, let's see whether these details will be stored in the student table or not. Okay, I showed you how the validation part is done, so I'm not going to check that again. Here's the full name. Okay, here's the name, and here's the email, and here is the password. Okay, here is the password, and I'm going to register this user. Okay, when I'm click on this button, you can see new user successfully registered. After that, you can see when we successfully register a new user, the details we added to the input fields will automatically reset. So it will be very helpful when we are registering more than one students. That's why I add that function too. Now let's go and check our database. Let me refresh this one. We are in the student table, and let's refresh this one. You can see our new student is his details are recorded in our database. Now we can use this credentials to log in as that student. But before that, I'm going to add some marks to that student. Okay, let's log in as the teacher. Here are the admin credentials, admin@gmail.com, and here's the password, admin@123. Let me show you here, and let's log in. We are logged in successfully. Now we can see, you can see our new user is showing in the student's name selector. That means I created this selector field dynamically, so it works as a dynamic selector field. When we are entering more students, their names will be showing here. So I'm going to select that new student, and let's set a date. Let's backdate this one. Now after that, here is the releasing date. Today let's give today the date as the same date, and after that here I am adding some marks here, and here's the grade. Here's the A, and let's submit these details. Okay, here results submitted. That's the message which will come when we added the details successfully. I validate this form too, but I'm not going to show that in this video, otherwise it will get very long. Okay, we successfully enter these details, and now we can go back to our login page and log as the user. Let me clear the cookies. Here I use cookies, actually the session. Let me clear them first, or otherwise we will register as the teacher. That's why I clear the cookies. I will explain what I done here later. Let's go back, and now I'm going to use the credentials. Let me copy those credentials of this new student and log in as that student to this system. And here's the email, and here's the password. Okay, now I'm going to click on the login button. Okay, here it identified the registered user, and here is the message, login complete, register, redirecting to the home page. Okay, here you can see here's the welcome page, and also his name is showing in the welcome text, and here is the table which I created to show the exams and the result. Here these are the details we entered, and let me show you the database. In the exam table, here you can see the ID of this student is number 3. So under that ID, here you can see the data we added earlier in the add user page as the teacher are showing here. You can see the dates and the results, and also the marks and the grade, and those details are showing here. So that's how this web application works. I think you have a good idea. Now I'm going to discuss the code I used to create this web application. Okay, let's go to the Visual Code Studio. Let's go to the index page first. I will explain from there. You can see the heading Biology Lanka and examination portal. Those are the headings I wrote to this I created for this web application. And here you can see the registration area and the login area. And I use Bootstrap to make this website responsive. I think it's not very necessary to show the responsiveness of this web application in this video. So I'm not going to do that. Let's go straight into the functions. Here you can see these are the input fields. To insert user details, I am going to discuss the registration part first, and after the login part. Okay. Here in the registration page, here are the input fields: full name, email, and password. And after a user fill those input fields, he will click on the add user button. When someone click on the add user button, here you can see I define an attribute called onClick, and its value is this function. There's a JavaScript function called add user. The purpose of this onClick attribute is it will execute this add user function, the JavaScript function, when someone click on this add user button. Okay, so when someone click on this button, let's go to the JavaScript file and see what will happen after that. You can see in the top of this JavaScript file, here I created some JavaScript variables and assigned the input elements by calling the ID. Here get element by ID means it will grab the HTML element in the index page. Go back to the index page, this one. Let's go back to the index page. Here you can see I assigned unique IDs to every input field in this index page, and I use those IDs to grab that element and assign those elements to separate JavaScript variables, and it will be very easy to access those variables by using this method. After that, here is the add user button. That's the function which will execute someone click on the add user button, this button in registration form. So let's go to the JavaScript file. Here in that when that function execute, it will create a new set of variables and assign the values of the input elements in the registration page. You can see INE field means these three INE, INP, and INF N fields are these three variables, and those variables are I use those variables to store the input fields of the registration form, which are the full name, email, and password. So after the add user function execute, it will extract the values. The values someone enter to these input fields, those values will be extracted and stored in separate variables. And after that, I created a form object. We use the form object to form object when we are dealing with more than one details, and when we want to send those details to a server-side file, those are the scenarios we are using this form method. So I append those input the values of those input fields, the email, password, and the full name into that form object. And you can see I created another new detail called key, and its value is AU. I also append that key value to the form 2. So these 4 tables will be stored in this form object, and I assign that form object to a new variable called form. So it's very easy to access this form method by calling this variable name. Okay. After that, I created a AJAX object. In this case, I use AJAX object. Usually we use AJAX object to send or request an server-side PHP file or something like that. You can request any file in this website. I use this AJAX technology to send these details to a server-side file. In this case, I send these files to process.php file. I'll explain that in a moment. I use this AJAX technology because it will send these details with the request to this specific file without reloading the user's current page, which is this page. When someone click on this button, it's not going to, you saw that earlier, it will not reload or redirect or something like that. It is not going to change. Only it is going to extract the details and send to the server side without knowing the user. That's the simple explanation for the AJAX object. Actually, I explained about this technology a lot in my previous videos, but in a nutshell, that's the purpose of this AJAX object. Let me skip this set of code lines. I will explain them later after I explain the process.php file. So let's come to this line 36. Here I call the AJAX object by the variable name I stored in and add a new method called open to that AJAX object. By using this method, you can see I first define the method I want to transfer these details to the server side. I need to transfer these details in post method. Post method is a more secure way to transfer details within files in our transfer from one file to another file. It's a very secure method than the other method. There are 2 methods called post and get. Get method will transfer details by combining those details to the URL, but that's not a very secure method. That's why I use the post method. So after that, here you can see I define the destination I want to transfer these details. This is the destination process.php file, and here you can see this is there's another keyword called true, and if you use the word true, that means you are using or you are requesting using the AJAX method. If you use the word false, it will make a request in SAJAX technology. There are 2 technologies. Actually, there are more technologies, but there are 2 main technologies called AJAX and SAJAX. There are no big difference between these 2, but I'm not going to talk about them in this video. In this case, I am using the word true to mention that I am transferring these details using the AJAX technology. After that, you can see I call the AJAX object again, and I add the send function. Send method. That means when this code 37 executed, it will make the request to the server side file, and you can see I append the form object to that method. That means it will send the form object 2 with the request to the server side file. So it's obviously take these 4 details to the server side with the object. Now let's go to the process.php file. the reason why I told you this process.php file is a server-side file, PHP is a language which will execute only in a Apache environment, which is the environment which will run in the server side. The user will never run the Apache environment. The browser installed in a user computer cannot read this PHP language. It only can be read in server-side Apache environments. So that's why I told you this file is a server-side file, because you can see there's no HTML elements. That means there's no design to show in this file. It only processes the data we are sending to this file. I will skip some codes in this part of the video because in this case I'm not going to explain all the processes which will done in process.php file. I told you we are talking about the registration part only for now. So I will explain the codes related to that registration part only. So here let me skip these two code lines, and here you can see I created another variable called DBMS. This is a PHP variable, and after that here is the connection to my database. Here you can see the connection database name Q5LMS, and here in the database, here's the database name Q5LMS. Okay, that's the connection, and it will be very easy to access this connection by calling this variable name. And after that it will check some details. You can see I add an if else chain. In the first if block, it will check whether there is a name or detail which will come to this file in post method, and that detail, there should be a detail called key, or there should be a data called key, and after that it will check the value assigned to this key data is equal to AU. If both these conditions are met, that's why I use this AND operator. If both of these conditions are met, it will execute this part of the code and left all these codes behind. Only execute this part of the code. And if these conditions or one of these conditions are not met, it will skip these code lines and go to this else if part and check in this else check the conditions in this else block. After that, here you can see it will check again there's a whether there's a data called key, and its value is, in this time it will check whether the value is equal to LO, not AU. It will check LO. Like that it will go down. But in this case we need only this part of the code, because you can see in the JavaScript file, when I'm appending the data to the form object, you can see I created a data called key and its value is AU. So when someone click on this add use function, it will send these details into the server side, and when this data will reach the server side process.php file, it will trigger this part of the code. So let's talk about this code line starting from code 8. Here there's another if else block. In the first in the if block, you can see it will again check whether there's a data called INFN. That means the first name and email and the password. You can see INE means email and INP means password. Here you can see in the JavaScript file, these are the data I append to the form.php file. So it will check whether this data will be come to the process.php file, and it will check whether the values assigned to these data or these names are empty. If one of these values have a empty, if one of these names have an empty value or data have an empty value, it will execute only this part of the code. It's an error code. You need to fill both fields. You saw that error code when I click on the on this add user button without entering without entering data. Here you can see it will execute or it will show this error code. You need to fill both fields. If these details have values, that means the user filled all these fields. So if there are 3 complete email input fields, it will execute the codes inside this else block. So in this else block, here you can see I created another 3 PHP variables and assigned the values of INF, INE and INP names or data into those 3 variables. And after that, again, here is the select query. This is a SQL query to select or to search whether these details are already stored in the system or in the database. That's what this SQL query do when it's executed. Here you can see in the next line I executed that query. I talk about this select queries a lot in my previous videos. You know, when we executed a select query, it will always output a result set. So that's why I created this variable, and when this query executed, you can see I executed that query using the database connection. DBMS means the database connection. You can see on the top of this file, and I assign the result set which will output after I execute the SQL query and assign to a new variable called SRS. And there's another variable in the next line. You can see I count the records, or let me show you in the database. If this whole database output as the result set, when this code line execute the SRS num rows, it will check the number of rows of this result set. So in this case there are 3 records, so it will output the output number 3 as the result, and I assign that number to a new variable, so it will store in this variable. And after the next line, here again there's another if else block. In the if block, you can see it will check the value of SNOR, that means the number of rows of the result set is equal to number 1. If the number of rows are equal to number 1, that means there's only a single record. That means there's a user already registered in our system. So that's another error, because we can't, it's not necessary to register the same person twice in our database. So it will output this error code. It's not going to insert the details again. It will output user already registered. After that, if the SNOR, that means the number of rows in the result set is not equal to 1, that means there's no details in the database. In our database, that means these details are new to the database, so it will execute the insert query. Here you can see I wrote a insert query and execute that query. So and you can see I append the details, the values, using the variable names I used to store those values, and it will insert or register these details in our database. After that, it will output this text number 1. If all the process is complete, and only if the details user registered is recorded as a new user, it will output the number 1. Otherwise there will be an error message. So after this process.php file execute, it will output this text value and send back to the client side computer as a text. Here now I am going to explain these code lines I skipped earlier, starting from code 21 to 35. Here there's another method I assign to the Ajax object on ready state change. That means every time our Ajax object change its state, it will execute this function again and again. Actually, not again and again, it will execute every time this Ajax object will change its state. So when this function execute, it will check again. There's another if condition. You can see it will again checking the ready state. That means the current state of the Ajax object is whether its state is equal to 4. If the state is equal to 4, it will execute these part of these code lines, and if it's not equal to 4, that means the data or the process, the outputted data of the process.php file is not data is still not come to the client side computer. Approximately there are 4 states in Ajax object. I talk about these states in my previous videos. I'm not going to explain a lot about these states, but in this case, the when the state is equal to number 4, that means the output, the process is completed in the server side file, and the output text will outputted text is already reached to the client side computer. So after that, it will create a new variable, and here you can see I assign the response text. That means the outputted text from the process.php file, and it will assign that text into this new variable. And in the next line you can see there's another if else block, and in the if block it will check whether the value assigned to the text variable is equal to number 1. That means it will check the details user added is successfully registered in the system. If the data is registered and there's no error, it will output this it will execute these code lines. You can see there's an alert. In this alert, new user successfully registered. You saw that when I when I register a new user, that message outputted. And after that, I showed you how the input fields are going to reset. I add that function using these three lines. You can see in field dot value, there's a empty value. You can see all these three values are empty. That means I call the input element, I call these three input elements using the variable I used to store those elements, and I make the value of that input elements to empty. So it will reset the values which typed by the user. So that's how that function works. And if there's any error, that means the outputted text is not equal to 1, so it will show the error message like this one. Let me show you. Like this, you need to fill all both fields, and user already registered. Those are error codes. If those error codes outputted from the process.php file, it will show that error code in a alert. That's how these error codes working, and that's the process of add user function. That means that's the process of this registration part. Now let's go back to the login part. I'm going to speed up this explanation. In the login part, the process is same as the registration page. There are only two input fields, and I assign two separate IDs to those variables, so it can be accessed in the JavaScript file. And here is the function which will execute when someone click on the login button. And here you can see in the JavaScript file, this is the function which will execute when someone click on that button. And here you can see I assigned the values of the input fields in login form to two separate variables. And after that, here is my form object, and I append those values and a new value called key, and its value is equal to LO. And I append these three values to the form object, and after that I created the Ajax object. You know what that Ajax object do. And here is the method. I again use the post method, and here is the destination. I transfer these three details to the same destination. And here's the technology I'm using. I'm using the Ajax technology, and also I'm transferring the form object with the request to the process.php file. When the details or the data come to the process.php file in post method, you can see in the first line it's not going to meet the requirements of the first line, because there will be a key which will come in post method. It's right, but the value is not equal to AU. You can see when we execute this login function, the value of the data called key is LO. So it's not going to execute the codes related to the user registration. It will skip these lines and come to this else if part, and again it will check whether there's a value name called key which will come in post method, and after that it will check the value is equal to LO. Now these two conditions are met. You can see that means it will execute this part of the code. And when there's the if one of these conditions are not met, it will go down to this line, and after that in the end it will check or it will execute the else part. But I'm going to explain this part only for now, because these two conditions will met when we execute the login function. So in this else if block, you can see there's another set of else if conditions, and first one, it will check the SE and SP, that means the email and the password. These two input fields have values inside of them. If one of these input fields are empty, it will execute this part. You need to fill both fields. You saw that error message, that's an error message, and after that, this is the this a very important part. You can see in the question, they specifically told us the teacher has a fixed email and password to log in as admin@gmail.com and password as admin@123. So when the teacher log in, he will enter those two credentials to the login page. So when the values recorded inside inside in the input fields of the login page, this login part are not empty, it will check whether the SE means the email fields, the value of the email field is equal to admin@gmail.com, and after that it will check whether the password is equal to admin@123. When both of these conditions are met, it need to met both of these conditions, not only one. That's why I use the AND operator, and it will execute this part of the code. So that's the teacher. So here you can see $_session privilege equal admin. That means I talk about these sessions in my last video. I'm not going to talk about in detail about the sessions, but in a nutshell, we use these sessions to sessions when we are login or when we are logging a user, so he can be identified as a logged in user everywhere in our web page. So that's why I use the session start method. When this method execute, it will start to check. You can see you saw I clean every time I am login as a new user and want to change my credentials. I clean this cookie. You can see this cookie will store in the browser of the user when we are when someone access my file. This is the name is PHP sysID. That's the cookie which will create when this function execute. So it will create a space to store user details in server side, and it will create spaces to all the users, and when someone request or when a user requests this file, it will check whether this user have this PHP sysID cookie, and it will check. Let me show you the content. Here you can see there's a unique key inside this PHP sysID cookie. So it will check this PHP sysID cookie and check the key. So it will if there's a space or session space in this, if there's a session space already created which corresponds with this key, it will allow the user to access that the session space or the user's details. If there's no cookie recorded, if there's no cookie stored in the in some user's browser, that means the user didn't log in. So anyway, it will create a new session space and create a unique key to that to access that session and stored in the client computer as a cookie. So here you can see in this part it will access that session here. $_session means the session. It will access the session and create a associative array called privilege, and it will assign this value, the admin, to this privilege variable. That's the process which will done when this code line execute, and after that it will output this text as the outputted text in a echo method. So if the teacher logged in, it will create a PHP session space to that teacher and store this value called admin assigned to a variable called privilege in that space. So every time teacher go to a different page in the website, we can identify the user as the teacher. So after this part execute, it will output the text number 1, and it will send that number 1 to the client side. I explained how the Ajax object work, and after that it will check. Let me go to the login part, and here it will check the value is equal to number 1. That means the process is complete. The user logged in. In this case, the teacher. So it will output this alert login complete, redirecting to the home page, and after that it will redirect the user to the home page. You can see there's a function called go to home. That's a function I created, and let me explain that one. Here you can see this is the go to home function, and in that function you can see window.location equal home. When this function execute, it will change the URL of the user to home.php file. In simple words, that means it will redirect the user to the home page. So that's what will happen after that. What will happen if the value is equal to 1 after the process is complete in the process.php file, and if the value is not equal to number 1, it will show the message or the text in an alert. You can see if the text is not equal 1, it's always an error message will be output from this process.php file. So that means it will show the error message in an alert. So that's what happened when teacher logged in with his fixed email and password. And here you can see when these conditions are not met, that means the user who is trying to log in is not the teacher. So he or she should be a student. So in that case, it will execute this else part. You can see I created two variables and stored the email and the password separately, and I used those variable names to check my database, and it will check the student table whether there's a record which have this email and the password which recorded in the email and the password field in login page. So you can see I again execute and stored the result set in a new variable, and I check the number of rows using numRows function, and store that number of rows in a separate variable, and I check the number of rows whether the number of rows is equal to number 1, and if it's equal to number 1, that means there's a user already registered in our database. That means he is a valid user, so it will execute this part of the code. Otherwise, if the user is not registered, that means there's an error. So it will execute, or it will output this error code, no such user found. When the SNOR, or the number of rows in the result set, is equal to number 1, here you can see I talk about this fetch assoc function. It will rip out the first let me show you the first the first record of this result set, and then input then it will extract the details in the attributes and store in an associative array, and I append that associative array, or assign that associative array to a variable called sData. And after that, again I access the session and created that users in that user session, and created a variable called user, and I append the data of the associative array we created based on the result set to that user variable, and it will again output the same value, number 1. That means the user is logged in. In this case, if this code line execute, that's a student. If this code line execute, that's the teacher. So that's what happened when we execute, or when we execute this function, login function, and it will log in the user and store the data in a session variable to identify the logged in users. Now I'm going to show you what will happen when someone redirected to the home page. Here we are in the home page, home.php file. Every time user logged in, all of these users will be redirected to the home page. And in the home page, you can see I again started the session. That means it will check the PHP says ID and gave access to the users session and the details recorded in that session. When we created, we are logging a user. If there's no cookie, or there's no cookie called PHP says ID, it will create a empty session and store the ID as a cookie to access that variable in the user's browser. And after that, here you can see there's another if else block. In the first line, it will check whether in the session of this user have a variable called user. That's the variable we are creating when we are logging a user. So it will check whether this user is logged in or not. If the user is logged in, it will execute this part of the code line, and if it's not, it will check whether this is the teacher. You can you can remember when we are registering, or sorry, not registering, when we are logging the user, when the teacher logged in, we created a variable called privilege, and the value is admin, not a variable called user. When a student logged in, every time we created only a variable called user and assigned the data of that student. So if the variable name is not equal user, that means the user is not a student, and it will check whether this is the teacher by searching the variable name, whether the variable name is equal to privilege. Here you can see it will check whether the whether the variable name is equal to privilege and the value assigned to that variable is equal to admin. So that's the teacher. So if that's the teacher, it will execute this part, and none of these conditions are met. That means he is not a teacher or he is not a student. If that's the case, it will execute this else line. You can see I connected the index page. I connected the JavaScript file, and in the JavaScript element here I call the go to register function, and after that here's another alert. You have to log in or register first. That means that user have to every time that user have to log in or register before accessing this page. So after that it will execute this part, go to register. Let me explain that quickly. In the function list here you can see in the JavaScript file there's a function called go to register, and like the go to home function, it will redirect the user to the index.php file, in this case to this file. Always a user trying to access that home page without logging to the system, he will be redirected to this file. He cannot watch the home page. Okay, that's the process which will happen in the home.php file. Let me explain what will happen when there's a variable in the session of a user called is equal to user. That means he is a student. When a student registered, you can see his details will be extracted from the session and stored in another new variable called udata, and after that here is again the connection to my database, and here's the SQL query. It will check the details. You can see in the udata means the associative array we created to store the user details when they are log into the system and stored in the session, and we extracted that associative array and reassigned it to the udata. And here you can see those three data. Let me show you. In the when we extract the details or record in student table, there will be four details: ID, name, email, and password. Each of these emails will be stored in separate variables which have the attribute name. With the attribute name here in the ID, it will store this value, and the name it will store this value, like that. There will be four variables in that associative array. When we execute the fetch assoc function, let me show you the fetch assoc function. When this execute, it will create that associative array and create separate variables and store those values separately. Here is a select query to the exam table, and you can see udata ID. That means the value of the ID variable which is stored in the udata array. You can see I assigned the user. There's a associative array we created called user, and it stored a bunch of records. Let me show you. It have the variable ID, name, email, and password, and all of them. All of those variables have values. Like as an example here, ID have a value number 1 and name Venura, like that. And it will extract those details and assigned to the udata variable, and it's also going to be associative array, and after that within that associative array it will get only the id of get only the value of the id, and it checking whether there's a corresponding id recorded in the exam table. You can see from exam, that means the exam table in this database, and it will checking this attribute and its values to a related id, and it will output that record related to that id and stored in this variable rftq. And after that, here this is the line which I used to execute this SQL query using the database connection we created. DBMS means the connection, and it will store in this way that result set in this variable. And after that, you can see I use this method a lot. I check the number of rows in that result set, and after that I end the PHP script, and here you can see it start here is a design. You can see these are HTML elements, all of them are HTML elements, and this is the results view. Results view is the page which will show to the users, but only the students in this web application, not the teacher or someone else. It's this is the page which will show the student's name and also his examination details in a table. Here you can see this is the heading, this is the welcome text, this is the title, results view, and also here you can see I dynamically created this text. You can see hello, and this is a PHP script again, and here it will show the name of the user, and it will get that name using the udata variable we created. You see it store the variable set, the set of variables stored in the session associative array, and after that from that variable it will get only the name and show the value. So it will change to user, it will change from user to user. And after that, here you can see this is a table element. In this table element, let me show you that one. I'm going to log in as a user. Let's copy this one. Let's log in as a different user. We logged in as this new user. I'm going to log in as a old user, and password is 123. Okay. Let's enter the email and the password 1234. Here's the password, and let's log in. Here, login complete. You can see I logged into this page earlier, and it showed the user's name. I logged in, and now it's changed to this user's name, and after that this is the table which will create when these lines execute, and it will show the examinations this student faced, and its marks, and also the grade. Okay, and after that, let me show you a very important part. Here you can see this is the heading of the page: number, examination date, release date, the green color row, and after that these are the rows which will show the marks and also the grade and examination dates, like that. These are the details, and you can see this table row is created in a for loop. I use this loop to create all the records which will store in our database related to this user, and you can see we store the result set from the exam table and stored it in a different variable, and also the number of rows in that table. And here in the for loop, I created a new variable, and its default value is equal to 1. And if this C value is less than or equal to the number of rows in our table, in our result set, it will loop, or it will execute until it reaches, until it exceed the number of rows in that result set. That means it will create all the records which will outputted as the result set after executing our select query. So it will create this TR tag. TR means the table row. You can see these are HTML tags, and it will create our records as HTML text. In here you can see there's only one record, and if the teacher enter another record to this user, there will be two records. Like that, this for loop will execute until those records are covered. That's the purpose of this result set. And you can see why I stored the number of rows in this result set, and that's the purpose. And here is the whole page. I explained the whole page, which will show to a student. Now I'm going to let me clear the cookie, or otherwise I'll logged in as the same user. That's why I'm removing these cookies. And let's refresh this page. Let me show you what will happen when I'm refreshing. You can see now the system identifies me as a non-logged in user or non-authenticated user. So it will show an error message. You have to log in or register first. I showed you and I explained you this error message, and when I click on the OK button, it will redirect me to the login page. You can see we are in the login page. That's what happened to a user who are not logged in, because when I deleted my PHP sys ID, that's the session ID, the site gave me to identify or to access my session space. So when I delete that, I cannot access that page. That means I am not logged in. That's why I redirect back to this page. And now let me go back to the code. Now I am going to explain what happened to the teacher. Here you can see only the teacher have a variable in session called privilege, and that variable value is equal to admin. When there's a student, his data will be stored in a variable called user in his session, and if the teacher, there will be a variable called privilege. So if I am the teacher, you can see this line will execute, not these lines, only this line, these set of lines. And here you can see I connected my JavaScript file, and also in the script you can see go to add result function will execute. Let's go back to the JavaScript file and see what's the go to add result function do. Here you can see it's also very similar to the go to home and go to register functions. It will change the user's location to addresal.php file. That's another page. That's the page I showed you. That's a page the teacher will use to record or update students' marks. So he will be redirected to that page. Go to the code again. Let's go to home.php file, and here you can see he will be redirected to this file at result.php. So here you can see I again started the session start function, and after that here another if else block. In this if else block, it will again check if this is the real teacher by checking the if there's a variable in his session called privilege and its value is equal to admin. And if both of these conditions are met, it will show this design. And if there's no variable called privilege or its value is not equal to admin and it's not the teacher, so this else part will execute. You can see I again joined or linked my JavaScript file, and after that in the script there will be an alert you have to log in or register first, and go to register. It will execute the go to register function. That's the error code which will show to the users who's trying to access this page directly, or if the user is not the teacher, they all of them will be redirected back to the login page. And if this is the real teacher, he can see the design of the ad result page. Here these are the HTML elements which will create the design of that page. Let me log in as the teacher. Let's add his credentials, admin@gmail.com. It will be very easy to explain it by showing that one. Okay, let's log in. Here login complete. Here is that result page, and this page will be showed only to the teacher. And if I try to access this adresult.php file directly without logging in, I will be redirected back to the home page or the login page. You saw when I deleted my cookie or the PHP session ID to access my session and reload the page, I will redirect it back to the login page because the site couldn't find me as a login user. Okay, and now I'm going to explain these codes. First, here I created my database connection, and after that here's a select query. This is a this select query will select all the details in student table, and I will explain why I done this part, and it will get only the ID and the name records. Here in the student table you can see it will get only the names of the students and also the IDs of the students. And after this execute, here in the next line I executed this query using the database connection, and after it execute, it will output the result set. In this case you can see there are 3 records, and ID and the names will be outputted and stored in a new variable. That's the result set, and that result set will be in a table format. In databases, in websites, we cannot access that the details in table format, but we can store those tables in variables, and it will this variable will store that table for us. And here I created another variable, and you know this part, I count the number of rows in that variable using the numRows function. And in this case you can see there are only 3 records, so it will store number 3. And let's go to the HTML design. Here are the common design, and here's the heading. Here you can see there's a selector called student's name, and this is the selector. Let me show you that one. Here this is the selector, and it will show all the names of the students. I created that query in the top of this page to get the details for that select query. So you can see this variable store those details in table format, and here is the first option. It's a default option, select student's name, and its value is equal to 0. I created this part to label that selector. You can see the teacher can easily understand this selector is used to select the student's name. So that's why I use the default one, and other three parts will be created dynamically. I use for loop to create those options. In this case there are only three, so you can see in the for loop I created a variable called another variable called C, and its default value is 0, and every time this C value is less than GSNOR value. That's the variable I use to store the number of rows in the result set of the students table. So every time this C value is less than the number of rows in the result set, it will execute this for loop until it equals to the number of rows. That means it will create same number of options to the records in the students table. So in that for loop you can see there's another variable, and it will store here GSNRS fetch SOP. You know what we'll do when we execute the fetch SOP function? It will, let me show you the database table. If this is the table, it will rip out the first record out from this table and extract the details and store those details in separate variables as a associative array. That's what the fetch SOP function do, and it will store those variables or the associative array in this array SN GSN data. And after that, here you can see I end the script, the PHP script, and I wrote the option element using the HTML tags. And here in this option element here, its value is equal to the ID of the student. It will extracted from the GSN data. That's the function. That's the variable I used to store the ID and the name of the students, and it will assign the ID as the value in this option, and it will show the name of the students in this option. Let me show you that one. Here you can see in the selector tab, when I click on a student, you can see his name will show in this selector, but its value is equal to his ID. That's what happened in this for loop. So it will create for now it will create three options like this. You can see this is the default one, and it will create other three options to select the name of the three students in our system. Okay, and after that these are the common input fields to store the examination date, result release date, and marks and grade. And the important part is you can see in these two input fields, its type is equal to date, and other two have the type as text. When we assign the type in a input field as date, you can see in the design here it only allows the user to store the values as date format. You can see he can only select dates. That's what that date function do. That's another part to highlight. And after that, all the details are entered. The user will click on this submit details button. So in the submit details button, there's again a on-click attribute, and it will execute this function add result when someone click on this button. So let's go to the JavaScript file and let me explain what will add result function do. Okay, here in the add result function, you can see when this function execute, it will extract all the details out from these input fields and store them separately in different variables. But there's another part to highlight. You can see in the SN means the student's name. When this SN value extracted, you can see only the value will be extracted. And let me highlight that part. In the add result page, you can see when we create the options using the for loop, the value of this option element is the ID of the student, and it will only show the name, but when I extract the value out from this option, it will get only the ID of this student and stored in that variable. Okay, that's what happened here, and others will extract the dates and the marks and the grade of the student and stored in different variables. And after that, you can see this is the same method I used to transfer the details to the process.php file. I created the form object, and after that, here's the Ajax object. I'm not going to explain this again and again. And here in the destination, you can see I transfer these details to the same page. We transfer the data in these functions login and register. It's the process.php file. Now let's go to the process.php file, and here you can see, let me go back to the JavaScript file. When I'm creating the Ajax object, I created another key, and now its value is equal to VSR, not like in this option, in these functions. In the login function, the key is equal to LO, and in the add user function, the key is equal to AU. But in this case, it's VSR. So let's go to the process.php file. See what happened when it execute. It will check whether there's a name called key, which will come in post method, and also check it whether its value is equal to AU. But in this case, it's not equal to AU, and after that it will check the key, whether there's a key and its value is equal to LO. But in this case, it's not LO, and it will go down. It will skip all these lines, and after that it will check again whether there's a key. Yes, there's a key, and after that it will check whether its value is equal to VSR. You can see when we execute this add result function, there will be a key, and also its value will be equal to VSR. So it will only execute these code lines until the else block. And now you can see these are the three possibilities which can exist in my web page: the register, login, and add result. And if one of these conditions are not met, that means there's an error. So you can see it will execute this error code here, this text called error. Every time the request cannot satisfy these conditions, it will output this error message. And now there will be no errors. You can see it will execute these parts when someone trigger the add result function. Okay, now let's talk about what happened in this part of the code. here there's another if condition, and it will check whether there's a name called Sn which will come in post method and its value is equal to 0. You can see it checks. Let's go to the result page. You can see the default value of this Sn. Sn is the student name. You can see that's the selector, and there's a default value I used to label the selector called select student's name. If someone left this part behind and didn't select a student name, it will output this value 0 and it will go to the process.php file. But it's not right to store details without the student's name, so that's why it will check whether the Sn value is equal to 0. That means it will check the user select the student's name or not. If the value is equal to 0, it will execute only this error code. You need to select a student name. That's the error code. And if the value of Sn is not equal to 0, that means there's a student's selected, and this else if part will execute. You can see it will check all the details are here. Empty Sn, empty SED is the examination date and the result release date, and marks and also the grade. It will check whether one of these values are empty. If all the values are not empty, it will execute these parts, and if one of these parts are empty, it will do nothing. Okay, let's see what happened. All the details are completed. It will store those values in separate variables, and here there's another part to highlight. Let me explain this part. In the grade, you can see the grade will be stored in a new variable, PHP variable called SG, and there's a important function. When the value stored, it will extract the value, and here str to upper. That means it will get the, when this function execute, it will get the value. It's a string value, and it changed to uppercase. This value will be changed to uppercase and stored in the SG function. So whether the grade is in lowercase or uppercase, every time it will change to the uppercase and stored in SG variable. I use that method to make a standard to store the grade. Here you can see teacher can store grades like A, B, C in lower cases and also upper cases. In this case, it's not matter whether he stored this grade or enter this grade in lowercase or uppercase. Every time grade the value will be changed to uppercase. That's what happened in this part. That's not a big deal. And again, there's a if condition. Here in this if condition, it will check the SG value is not equal to A, B, C, S or F. These are the standard grading format. A is over 75 marks, and B is over 65, C is over 45, like that. These are the standards, and the grade is not in those standards. It will show this error code, wrong grading format. And you can see these are validations. I use validations until the last part of this, until the last process of this web page. And in the next line, if the SG function have no errors, it will check SED is greater than SRRD. That means it will check should be changed to equal to. It will check whether SED, that's the examination date, whether that's the date which held that examination, and it's this line checking it'll whether it's older than or equal to the result release date. You can see the result cannot be releases in older date than the examination date. That's what this part checking, and if these conditions not met, that means there's an error in the date, so it will output this error code date mismatched. And after that, if there's no errors, it will check this one. This is the last validation. SM is more than 100. That means the marks of the students, and it will check whether the marks are over than 100. You know, the standard, the marks will be recorded out from 100. If the marks is over 100, it will show this error code. Mark can go beyond 100 marks. And after all of these conditions are not true, that means there's no error in our date for in our values, so it will execute this else part. In the else part, you can see this insert query. We use this the query like this in when we are registering a user. It will insert these details into our database. In this case, it will insert these details into the exam table. And here I executed that one using the database connection, and it will output number 1. If this file complete its process and output number 1, that means the data is submitted correctly. And let's go back to the JavaScript file, and in the Ajax object you can see it again check whether the outputted text is equal to number 1, and it's equal to number 1. It will output this alert result submitted. And here if it's not equal to number 1, that means there's an error, so it will check it will show that error message by putting it in an alert. Okay, that's what happened in this addResult function, and I think that's the whole process in my answer. Here we completed all of these requirements of question 5, and I think that's it for this video. Let's see you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching.